Hi, my name is Catherine Doyle, and I am the daughter they tried to erase. That's not an exaggeration, not when I've just watched 18 years of sacrifice vanish overnight. Gone, siphoned away by the very people who share my last name. The money wasn't for me. It never was. It was for my father, William Doyle. 82 years old, a retired shipbuilder who can still tell you the weight of every tool by feel alone. He's lying in the ICU right now, connected to more machines than I can count, fighting through his second major heart crisis in 3 years. And I had one promise to him. When the hard days came, I'd be ready. I thought I was. It was late October in Charleston, one of those nights where the air smells faintly of salt and wood smoke. My shop, a small medical supply store on the corner of Rutledge Avenue, was quiet except for the hum of the refrigeration unit in the back. I sat at the counter with a stack of invoices, my reading glasses sliding down my nose, a pen tapping out an absent-minded rhythm. Outside, the street was almost empty, just a few leaves scraping along the pavement whenever the wind cut through. The phone rang. At first, I almost let it go to voicemail. It was 9:47 p.m., and I'd been on my feet since sunrise. But then I saw the hospital's number on the screen, and my pulse jumped. "This is Dr. Keating," a woman's voice said when I answered, crisp but carrying a thread of urgency. "Catherine, I'm calling about your father. His heart is in severe distress. We may have to operate sooner than we planned, possibly within the week." Her words blurred together after that. I heard unstable rhythm, ventricular strain, prepare for surgery. The only thing I could think about was the savings account I'd built piece by piece for this exact moment. After we hung up, I locked the shop, hurried home, and opened my laptop on the kitchen table. My fingers moved automatically. Bank website, account login, security question. The same ritual I'd done maybe twice a year, just to make sure the money was still there. $920,000. I'd started that account when I was 20, back when I worked double shifts at a diner and cleaned storage units on weekends to scrape together enough for my own bills. My parents had co-signed back then because the bank required it. I never changed it. It seemed harmless, and they were family. Over the years, I'd funneled in everything I could. Bonuses from the shop, holiday overtime pay, even the $5 tips customers sometimes pressed into my palm when I delivered oxygen tanks after hours. The sight of that number had always been an anchor for me, proof that no matter what else happened, I could keep my father safe. Tonight, it felt like a lifeline. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, that worn, stubborn smile he wore even when the first heart scare hit him. By morning, I was back at the kitchen table, coffee cooling at my elbow as I logged in again to double-check the transfer process. The page loaded. My breath stalled in my chest. Balance, $0.00. I stared, refreshed the screen, again and again. The same result, an empty account, wiped clean. I grabbed my phone, thumb fumbling over the keypad as I dialed the bank. The customer service rep was polite, practiced, almost too calm. "The funds were withdrawn yesterday afternoon," she said, "authorized by your co-signers." My mind stuttered. Co-signers? "Yes, ma'am, Helen Doyle and Mark Doyle." My mother, my brother. The room seemed to tilt. That account is mine. I've been the only contributor for nearly 2 decades. "I understand, ma'am," she said, her voice softening in the way people do when they can't actually help you. But with their co-signing authority, the withdrawal was processed as valid. I ended the call before my voice cracked. When I called my mother, she answered on the second ring. Cheerful, almost breezy. "Oh, that money? We needed it for something more important." More important? Dad's in the ICU. That fund was for him. In the background, I heard Mark's voice, low but distinct. "He's had a good run. We need it more than he does." I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white. "Don't be dramatic," my mother interrupted. "We're family. We share what we have." Share. As if I'd been holding back, as if I hadn't spent years doing without so they could have more. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. I sat in silence, the sound of my own breathing loud in the kitchen. My eyes landed on the brass pocket watch sitting by the fruit bowl. My father's, polished smooth over decades in his palm. He'd carried it every day when he worked at the shipyard, its steady tick a comfort during the long, punishing shifts. I picked it up, running my thumb over the worn engraving on the back, and for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be at war with your own blood. By early afternoon, I was in my truck, the pocket watch in my coat pocket, heading toward my parents' house. The drive took me past all the familiar markers of my childhood. The cracked sidewalks where I'd learned to ride a bike, the churchyard where Dad once lifted me onto his shoulders during the Christmas parade. But none of it felt like home anymore. I didn't bother knocking. My mother was in the kitchen, rinsing lettuce as if nothing in the world had shifted. Mark was in the living room, reclined in Dad's old chair, the TV blaring a game show. He didn't even look at me when he said, "You know, he should just let go. Stop wasting resources." Resources. That's what my father had become to them, a drain, a problem to solve with someone else's money. I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, the sound of footsteps pounded on the porch, followed by a sharp rap on the door. That knock would change everything. The knock at the door was sharp, official. Not the polite two-tap rhythm of a neighbor or a friend. Mark glanced toward the sound but didn't move. My mother stayed at the sink, the water running over the lettuce in a steady stream. When no one answered, the door opened anyway. A man in a crisp navy uniform stepped inside, shutting the door behind him with a deliberate click. He carried a thick envelope under one arm and wore an expression that didn't invite questions. His eyes swept the room, landing first on Mark, then on me, before settling back on my brother. "Mark Doyle?" His tone was even, but there was an edge to it, the kind you hear from someone used to giving orders in a place where orders are obeyed. Mark shifted in Dad's recliner. "Who's asking?" The man pulled a leather wallet from his pocket, flipped it open to show a badge. "Blake Thompson, process server." Mark frowned, but Blake didn't wait for him to speak. He held out the envelope. "This is for you. Please sign to confirm receipt." Mark didn't take it right away. His eyes slid toward my mother, as if she could wave this inconvenience away with a flick of her wrist. She dried her hands on a towel, crossed her arms, and shook her head slightly. A silent signal to keep calm. Sophie appeared in the doorway from the hall, her smile quick and curious, like a kid at Christmas. "You can give that to me," she said. Blake's gaze didn't waver. "It goes to Mark Doyle. Signature required." Mark finally pushed himself up from the chair, muttering under his breath as he took the envelope. His fingers dug into the seam like he might crush the paper out of spite. He didn't open it right away. He looked at me first, his eyes narrowing, then back at our mother. Sophie rolled her eyes. "For heaven's sake, just see what it is." Mark tore the flap. A faint smell of coffee drifted from the papers inside. My father's coffee. The dark roast he swore tasted better from an old metal tin than anything fresh from the store. That scent pulled at me, softening the knot in my chest for just a moment. Then Sophie's voice cut through it like glass. "What's this supposed to be? Some kind of scare tactic?" Mark scanned the first page. I watched the color drain a shade from his face. "It's a notice," he muttered. Blake spoke up, calm and clear. "Formal notification of a pending financial investigation related to withdrawals from a protected savings account. Preliminary only, not a lawsuit at this time. It establishes record." My mother scoffed. "This is ridiculous. We're family. Families take care of each other." By emptying the account meant for Dad's surgery? My voice was steady, but it scraped in my throat. Sophie's eyes lit with that sharp satisfaction she'd perfected over the years. "You're overreacting. It's family money. You're not the only one who cares about him." "If you cared," I said, "you wouldn't have touched a cent of that fund." She shrugged, pretending it was all a misunderstanding. "He's old. He'd tell us to be practical. Mark nodded, grateful to have her words to echo. Exactly. Blake stepped forward just enough to reclaim their attention. For the record, Mr. Doyle, this notice documents the withdrawal pattern and the parties involved. It also references bank security protocol. If the matter escalates, you'll be contacted again. Mark straightened his shoulders, puffing himself up like that might intimidate Blake. We haven't done anything wrong. Blake's face didn't change. He placed a small card on the coffee table and stepped back. If you have questions, my contact information is there. Then, turning toward me, he lowered his voice just enough so only I could hear. You might want to talk to the bank again. Something about this didn't go through the usual channels. A ripple of cold ran down my spine. What do you mean? But he didn't answer. He just gave the faintest nod, then walked out, closing the door with that same clean click. The silence in the room was thick. The TV in the corner still murmured about some contestant winning a jackpot no one here cared about. Sophie broke it first, her tone laced with mockery. So, a piece of paper. People send those when they want attention? I reached toward the envelope, but Mark pulled it back like a child refusing to share a toy. You made this happen, he said. You couldn't leave well enough alone. What's well enough about draining a medical fund? My voice was still low, but the steel in it made Sophie's smirk falter. There was a plan, Mark said. You knew it. A plan that didn't involve telling me? A plan that meant Dad's care gets postponed while You're not the only one who loves him, my mother interrupted, stepping closer, her hands held out in false peace. We have responsibilities, too. Then why take the money set aside for his care? Why not call me? Why not ask? Sophie let out a dry laugh. Because you always say no unless it benefits you. You think you're the only one who's ever sacrificed. I felt the old anger stir, the one that came from years of being told my effort didn't count. I closed my eyes for half a second, inhaling the ghost of that coffee scent still lingering from the envelope. I've said yes more times than either of you will admit, I said quietly, and that account had one purpose, one person. Mark jabbed a finger toward the door. You are not going to turn this into a circus. We'll handle it. You just got told you're on record for a financial investigation, I replied. That's not me making a scene. That's due process arriving on your doorstep. My mother's face paled. You drag your own family through the mud? You poured the mud, I said. I'm just refusing to drown in it. Sophie tilted her head, her voice turning deceptively sweet. What exactly are you going to do? You think some bank manager will take your side over ours? We've been with them longer than you've been alive. That wasn't true, and we all knew it. But facts didn't matter to Sophie. Pressure did. I'll do what I have to, I said, for him. Mark set the envelope on the table and flattened it with his palm, as if that might smooth away the meaning. You will not embarrass this family. We'll talk to the bank. Make sure they understand the arrangement. Do that, I said, because I'm going to talk to them too. My mother tried once more to pull me back into her version of reason. You should rest. You get emotional and make messes. Let us fix this. I thought of Dad's hand on my shoulder the day I made the first deposit into that account. Set it aside, he'd said. When the hard days come, you'll be ready. I wasn't about to stop now. I'll call when I have an update, I said, turning for the door. Don't you dare bring outsiders into this, Mark snapped behind me. I stopped, my hand on the doorknob. A process server just handed you a notice in your living room. Outsiders are already in it. Sophie crossed her arms, chin high. Go ahead. Make your little calls. You'll find nothing sticks. That's the thing about the truth, I said, looking at her squarely. It tends to stick all by itself. I stepped outside into the cool air, the late afternoon light casting long shadows over the porch. The street felt quieter than usual, the kind of stillness that tells you a storm is coming. In my coat pocket, the pocket watch was warm against my palm. Solid. real. Something worth holding on to in a day that had been anything but. I didn't know yet where Blake's hint would lead me, but I knew one thing. If there was a seam in how they'd pulled this off, I'd find it and pull until the whole thing unraveled. By the time I reached my truck, the daylight was already thinning, the sky taking on that bruised purple of late autumn in Charleston. I sat behind the wheel for a long minute, watching the wind push dead leaves along the curb, Blake's words replaying in my head. Something about this didn't go through the usual channels. That could mean a lot of things. A bank employee bending rules for a friend, a manager skipping required approvals, or paperwork processed off the standard path so it wouldn't trigger automated flags. I didn't know which, but I knew where to start. The bank was only 10 minutes away and I made it in 8. The front doors were still open, though the lobby was quiet except for the faint hum of the HVAC. The polished wood counters gleamed under soft lighting, and the smell of faintly stale coffee drifted from somewhere behind the teller line. Mrs. Crowley, the branch manager, was at her desk, reading glasses perched low on her nose. She looked up when I approached, her polite smile faltering slightly when she saw my expression. "Catherine," she said, rising from her chair, "is something wrong?" I placed the process notice on her desk, sliding it toward her. "I want a full breakdown of this withdrawal, $920,000 taken yesterday." Her brows drew together. "That's significant. Large withdrawals like this usually require in-person authorization from the account holder. I didn't authorize it," I said flatly. For a moment, she just looked at me, weighing my tone, my posture, the anger I wasn't trying to hide. Then she leaned back in her chair. "I'm not supposed to pull security footage without a formal request," she said slowly, "but if you're telling me this was unauthorized..." She trailed off, stood, and motioned for me to follow her into the back. The hallway behind the teller lane was narrow, lined with beige filing cabinets and a faint smell of toner from the copy machine. In a small office at the end, a computer monitor glowed against the dim room. She tapped the keyboard, fingers moving with the ease of someone who's done this 1,000 times. The video feed loaded, and there they were, Helen and Mark sitting in the banker's chairs like they belonged there. My mother had her reading glasses pushed low on her nose, signing page after page with deliberate, slow strokes. Mark lounged back, one ankle resting on his knee, watching like it was a show he'd already seen. Mrs. Crowley zoomed in on the form. The name on the signature line was mine, but the handwriting. The loops were wrong. The slant leaned too far. It was the kind of signature you get when someone's looking at a copy and trying too hard to match it. "Do you want a copy?" she asked. "Yes." She printed the still frame, sliding it across the desk along with the transaction record. I signed the security log to request a formal copy of the video, my pen hesitating near the bottom of the page, the way it always did. It left a tiny blot of ink, the same way my father's did when he signed checks. I stared at it for a moment, feeling the weight of the difference. My real mark, warm and imperfect. Theirs, a lifeless forgery. "This wasn't just theft," I said quietly. "It's impersonation." Mrs. Crowley lowered her voice. "If this becomes a legal matter, our compliance department will have to testify. Officially." I slipped the papers into my bag. "Then you might want to be ready." We were halfway back to the lobby when a young teller I'd seen earlier, Michael, his name tag read, passed us. He didn't break stride, but as he walked past me, he slipped a folded slip of paper into my hand. I didn't open it until I was outside in the cool evening air. 4 words scrawled in rushed handwriting. "Check the safe deposit." The bank's safe deposit room was in the basement. Mrs. Crowley didn't question me when I asked for access. The box had been in my family's name for decades. She handed me over to Irene, the vault attendant, who had the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that made you believe nothing escaped her notice. "You were last here almost a year ago," Irene said, flipping through the leather-bound sign-in log. But there was another visit, just 3 days back. I didn't have to ask who. Sophie, I said. She glanced up briefly, then handed me the clipboard. That's what it says here. The vault door groaned as Irene turned the master key. Inside, the air was cool and faintly metallic. Rows of metal boxes lined the walls like a library of secrets. Our family's box slid out with a dull scrape. I set it on the narrow table, unlocked it with my key, and lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was an envelope thick and cream-colored, sealed with wax. My father's handwriting curved across the front. For my daughter, only when the time is right. My throat tightened, but I didn't open it. Not yet. Beneath it were several folded receipts. I smoothed one out and felt my stomach drop. Gold bullion purchases, dated the same day as the withdrawal. The gold wasn't here. I kept digging, pulling out smaller boxes until my fingers brushed something familiar. A black velvet case. I opened it, expecting to see my father's gold cufflinks, the ones he wore to every important family gathering. Only one cufflink remained. In the empty space beside it was a crumpled scrap of paper. I unfolded it carefully. A name and an address were scrawled in uneven ink. A storage facility I'd never heard of, in a town nearly 40 miles away. Irene cleared her throat. Technically, without the joint key holder's consent, you shouldn't remove documents that aren't yours. I slipped the scrap into my pocket anyway. Noted. She didn't stop me, but her gaze followed me all the way out of the vault, measuring something I couldn't quite read. Back in the lobby, the last of the day's light slanted through the tall windows, pooling in gold on the marble floor. I stepped outside, the paper in my pocket like a pulse against my hip. That's when my phone buzzed. A text message. No name, just a number I didn't recognize. You're digging too deep. Stop now or he dies. I stopped dead on the sidewalk. The words blurred for a second, as if my brain refused to process them. They didn't have to name him. I knew exactly who they meant. My father, still in the ICU, still clinging to life. My thumb was already hitting call on the hospital's main line before I could think. This is the ICU, Marjorie speaking. It's about my father, William Doyle, room 412. Is he okay? There was a pause long enough for my heartbeat to roar in my ears. He's still with us, she said finally. Vitals are holding, but it's still critical. You can visit during the next window at 4. I exhaled slowly, the tension in my shoulders loosening just enough for me to breathe. Thank you. I hung up but didn't move right away. I stood there on the sidewalk, phone in my hand, replaying the text. A sane person would have called the police, reported the threat. But in my gut, I knew this wasn't a stranger. This was someone close. Close enough to get into the ICU without raising suspicion. If I tipped my hand too early, they'd go deeper into hiding. What I needed was proof, not just suspicion, something they couldn't talk their way out of. The address from the scrap of paper took me north, away from Charleston's familiar streets and into low-country backroads lined with moss-draped oaks. The air smelled of wet earth, the kind of damp that clings to you long after you've stepped indoors. The storage facility sat on the edge of a small town I'd only ever passed through. A chain-link fence wrapped the perimeter, topped with coiled razor wire. The sign out front read Lowland Secure Storage in sun-faded paint. The office was a prefab unit with a single desk, 2 plastic chairs, and a coffee maker that had seen better decades. Behind the desk sat a man in his late 50s with a shaved head and a calm, slow-moving demeanor, like nothing could rush him. "Afternoon," he said, looking up from a clipboard. "Can I help you?" "I'm here about Unit 317, I said. "It should be under the name Doyle." He flipped through a ledger. "Mark Doyle," he confirmed. "Monthly payments, cash. He was here last week." "Does it list any authorized users?" I asked. He scanned the page again. 2, Mark Doyle and Sophie James. I didn't react. Sophie using her full name meant she was expecting paperwork somewhere down the line, and she didn't care. I don't have a key, I admitted. The man shrugged. We can cut the lock if you're on the access list. You're not. But if you have a court order... I thought of the process notice Blake had served. It wasn't a court order, but it was official enough to make people pause. I slid it across the desk. He read it, his brow lifting slightly. Well, I'm not in the habit of crossing legal notices. Tell you what, I'll look the other way for 20 minutes. You didn't get that from me. We walked out to the unit together. The rows of storage doors stretched like a maze, each one padlocked and numbered in peeling black paint. 317 sat at the far end, partially shaded by a leaning pine. The man produced a bolt cutter from a utility cart. The lock snapped with a dull, metallic crunch. He left without a word, his footsteps fading down the gravel lane. I pulled the door open. The smell hit first. Stale cardboard, motor oil, and something faintly metallic, like the inside of a safe. Dust motes floated in the shaft of light from the doorway. Boxes were stacked waist-high along the walls. I started with the ones closest to me, pulling off brittle packing tape and peering inside. The first held stacks of bank envelopes, all empty. The next, medical supply catalogs, pages dog-eared around high-priced equipment. In the third box, beneath a tangle of bubble wrap, I found it. A portable hard drive heavy in my palm. Taped to it was a yellow, sticky note. Backup, don't erase. I slipped it into my bag and kept going. At the back of the unit sat a steel cabinet with a combination lock. I didn't have the code, but the hinges were old, and a flathead screwdriver from a nearby crate made quick work of the screws. Inside were two items. First, a thin leather folder stuffed with photocopies of purchase receipts for gold bullion, dated just days ago. The amounts matched almost exactly what had been taken from my father's account. Second, a DVD in a plain paper sleeve, unmarked except for a date scrawled in black marker. Last Tuesday. I set the DVD on top of the hard drive in my bag, then turned to close the unit. That's when I noticed the small black dome in the upper corner of the wall. A motion-activated camera. If it was functional, it would have caught me in here. I debated unscrewing it, but time was ticking. I pulled the door shut, slipped out the way I'd come, and made for my truck. Back in Charleston, I didn't go home. I went straight to the only person I trusted to handle whatever was on that hard drive, without asking too many questions. Harper Lane, a private investigator who rented an office above a locksmith on Meeting Street. Harper was a former police detective, early 40s, with a way of speaking that made people tell her more than they meant to. She was also one of my father's oldest friends, and the kind of person who didn't need to be asked twice to get involved when family was on the line. "You look like you've been digging in places you shouldn't," she said when I walked in, eyeing the dust on my sleeves. "You're not wrong." I placed the hard drive and DVD on her desk. "This was in Mark's storage unit. I think it's connected to the money, and maybe something worse." She raised a brow. "Worse?" I told her about the text message, the threat. Harper's easygoing expression hardened. "That's not just worse, that's a whole different game." She slid the DVD into her laptop first. A grainy image filled the screen. A dimly lit room, the camera aimed at a hospital bed. My father lay in it, pale and still, an oxygen mask strapped over his face. Two figures stood on either side of the bed. One was Sophie, the other, a man in hospital scrubs, his face half-shadowed, but the badge on his chest caught enough light to read the name, T. Mendez. They were talking quietly, but Harper boosted the audio. "Gold's safer than the account," Sophie was saying. "If she catches on, we move him." "Not without the tests," Mendez replied. "We can't sell what we can't certify." Harper froze the frame. "Tests?" I stared at the screen, my stomach turning cold. They're talking about him like he's inventory. Harper leaned back, rubbing her jaw. If I didn't know better, I'd say this sounds like a black market organ operation. There have been whispers for months. Older patients. No family watchdog, vanishing after complications. The words felt like ice water in my veins. "That's why they emptied the account," I said slowly. "They needed to fund something else. And Dad—" "They see him as a payday," Harper finished, "not a person." We sat in silence for a beat, the only sound the faint whir of the laptop fan. Finally, Harper reached for her phone. "I'm calling someone. Reed Walker, head of security at the hospital, ex-military. If anyone's going to help us catch them without tipping them off, it's him." As she spoke, I felt the weight of the pocket watch in my coat again, the steady, silent reminder of why I couldn't afford to back down. Harper ended the call. "He'll meet us in an hour. Bring the drive. We'll need every file on it." I nodded, but my gaze stayed fixed on the frozen frame of Sophie by my father's bed. In that moment, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about getting the money back. This was about keeping him alive. And no threat, no family tie, no whispered warning was going to stop me. Reed Walker looked exactly like the kind of man you'd want watching your back. Broad-shouldered, calm-eyed, and with the kind of posture that said he noticed everything before you did. We met him in a diner across from the hospital, the kind of place where the coffee came in thick white mugs and the waitresses called everyone Hon. He slid into the booth across from me and Harper, his badge clipped to his belt but turned inward. "Harper filled me in," he said, his voice low. "If what you're saying is true, we have a serious breach on our hands, and not just theft. This is organized." Harper pushed the portable hard drive toward him. "Everything's on here. Video, documents, receipts, and a DVD showing one of your nurses, Mendez, in a patient's room with a woman named Sophie James." Reed's jaw tightened. "Mendez has been on my radar for a while. Good on paper, but too many unexplained shift swaps. And Sophie James, she's not staff. She shouldn't even be near restricted areas." "She's my sister," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "And she's not the only one. My brother Mark's involved, too." Reed nodded slowly, absorbing it. "All right, here's how we do this. We don't go to the police yet. Too many leaks. We set up our own watch inside. I can get you both in after visiting hours, posing as volunteers. You'll have access to the floor, but you'll follow my lead. No hero moves." "Understood," Harper said before I could argue. 2 hours later, I was wearing light blue scrubs with a volunteer badge that had someone else's name on it. Harper was dressed the same. Reed walked us through the service entrance, past laundry carts and supply closets, until we emerged onto the quiet 4th floor. The ICU lights were dim, the air cool and sterile. Every beep of the monitors felt louder than it should have. "Room 412 is at the end," Reed murmured. "Your father's stable, but I want you to stay moving. We're here to watch, not to be watched." We split up. Harper and Reed took the west wing. I walked the east, keeping my head down but my eyes open. It didn't take long to notice patterns. 2 orderlies pushing carts of supplies that never stopped at any patient's room, a clipboard exchange in the hallway, one man jotting something down, the other pocketing a folded envelope. At 8:17 p.m., I saw him, Mendez. He was coming out of a storage room, glancing over his shoulder before locking it. His gaze swept the hall, casual but too deliberate to be innocent. I stepped into an alcove until he passed, then trailed him at a safe distance. He walked straight toward room 412. My pulse spiked. From around the corner, I saw him slip inside without knocking. I moved closer, pressing my back to the wall just outside the door. The curtain inside was drawn, but his voice carried. "Blood work first, then we'll know if he's viable." The words made my stomach lurch. Another voice, Sophie's. "Just hurry. We're running out of time and she's sniffing around too much." I risked a glance through the gap in the curtain. My father lay motionless, the monitor's steady beep slicing through the tension. Sophie stood on the far side of the bed, her arms folded. Mendez was adjusting an IV line, a small vial in his other hand. That was when I felt the faint vibration in my pocket, the pen camera Harper had given me earlier. I clicked it on. aiming it just enough to catch the scene through the curtain gap. "Once this is in his system, the next step's easy," Mendez said quietly. I stepped back fast, ducking into the hallway just as Reed appeared from the other direction. I mouthed 412 and tapped my pocket. His eyes hardened. He spoke into the radio clipped to his shoulder. "Code Gray, quiet lockdown, Section C, now." Within seconds, 2 security officers appeared from the far end, moving quickly but without drawing attention. Reed slipped into the room, his voice calm but firm. "Evening, folks. What's going on in here?" Mendez stiffened. Sophie plastered on a smile. "Visiting my father. Is that a crime now?" "Visiting hours ended an hour ago," Reed said, stepping between Mendez and the IV line. "And this isn't your patient." "He's my father," Sophie said sharply. Reed's gaze didn't shift. "Then you won't mind if I take a look at whatever's in your hand." Mendez hesitated, then slowly set the vial on the counter. The label was handwritten, not hospital issue. Harper appeared in the doorway behind him, her phone in hand, already recording. "You should know," she said. "This is going on record." Sophie's mask slipped. "You think you can prove anything?" Harper smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "We don't have to think. We already can." Mendez's hand twitched toward his pocket, but one of the security officers stepped forward. "Hands where I can see them." Reed leaned toward me. "Get him to safety?" he murmured. I moved to my father's side, my fingers curling around his hand. It was warm, steady. He stirred faintly, his eyelids fluttering at the sound of my voice. "It's okay, Dad. You're safe now." Out in the hallway, the quiet lockdown had sealed off the floor. No one in or out without clearance. Harper slipped me the pen camera as we left the room. "This," she said, "plus the files from that drive? We've got them dead to rights." But Reed shook his head. "Not yet. They're just the middle link. We need to see who's pulling the strings, the one buying the product they're preparing to take." The way he said product made my stomach turn again. "You're saying we let them keep moving?" I asked. "I'm saying," Reed replied, "we let them think they're still ahead. We catch them at the handoff." Harper's eyes lit with the spark I'd learned meant trouble. But the good kind. "And we'll be there, with every camera rolling." I looked through the glass panel into my father's room. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, the monitor beeping softly. We'd bought him time tonight. Now we had to make sure it lasted. We met again in Harper's cramped office the next morning. The blinds were drawn, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee. On the desk between us sat the portable hard drive, the pen camera, and the DVD. 3 pieces of evidence, but not enough to end this yet. Reed stood with his arms crossed, studying the wall where Harper had pinned up a map of the hospital and surrounding neighborhoods. Red pushpins marked points of interest: the ICU, the hospital's side exits, a loading dock. "They'll move him soon," Reed said. "Once they think the heat's off, that's when we grab them at the handoff." Harper traced a finger along the street grid. "We need to know where the buyer's coming from, what vehicle, and how they plan to get him out without triggering alarms." I sat forward. The DVD shows Mendez and Sophie talking about tests. Is it possible they're waiting on results before the handoff? Reed nodded. "Which means the minute those results are in, the plan moves." "Then we need ears inside the lab," Harper said. "Someone who can tip us when the report's ready." Reed's lips quirked. "Already working on it." He slid a small envelope across the desk toward me. Inside were 2 laminated badges. Mine read Nutrition Services. Harper's read Environmental Tech. "Food service and cleaning crews go everywhere," Reed explained. "No one looks twice. We'll plant cameras and audio recorders in the lab, the ICU, and the loading dock. When they move him, we follow. Quietly." I stared at the badge. "And if they catch us?" "Then we improvise," Harper said with a half smile. That night, we went in as planned. The hospital's fluorescent lights cast everything in that pale, washed-out glow that makes even healthy people look sick. Reed escorted us in through the service entrance, then split off toward the lab. Harper and I took opposite sides of the ICU floor. I worked the meal cart, pushing it slowly down the hallway, delivering trays to rooms. A cover that let me linger near my father's door. Every time I passed, I caught his eyes fluttering open just for a second, as if he knew I was there. In the lab, Reed had a tiny recorder clipped under the edge of a workstation. He stayed close enough to overhear without drawing suspicion. At 9:42 p.m., the first break came. Through the hidden mic, we heard a low voice. Tests came back clear. Schedule for tomorrow, 4 a.m., East Loading Dock. Harper and I locked eyes across the hall. Tomorrow, 4 a.m. We met in the parking lot an hour later, the cold night air biting at our skin. Reed laid it out fast. They'll sedate him in his room, wheel him through the east exit, and load him into whatever transport the buyers arranged. We'll have 2 teams, me and hospital security on the dock, you 2 in a car ready to follow. We get them in the act with clear footage. That's what makes it airtight. I gripped the strap of my bag. And if they realize we're onto them, then, Reed said, we move to Plan B, block the exit, and call in every uniform in the building. Harper cracked her knuckles. I like Plan B. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with my father's pocket watch ticking steadily in my palm, its soft click marking the seconds until we moved. Every creak in the house made me glance toward the door. Every gust of wind rattling the windows made my heart kick harder. At 3:15 a.m., I was back in the hospital parking lot. The air was heavy with mist, the kind that clings to your hair and seeps into your clothes. Harper was already there, leaning against her car, her breath forming pale clouds in the cold. Reed arrived a few minutes later, dressed in black, a radio clipped to his shoulder. Security's in position, he said. Cameras are live. We've got eyes on the dock. We climbed into Harper's car and waited. The world felt muffled at that hour, as if the city itself was holding its breath. At exactly 3:57 a.m., movement. Through the mist, we saw 2 figures in scrubs pushing a gurney down the side hallway toward the dock. Even from this distance, I recognized Sophie's gait. That brisk, clipped walk she'd had since she was a teenager. The man on the other side was Mendez. My father was on the gurney, a blanket pulled up to his chin. His head lolled slightly, eyes closed, the sedation already at work. A dark van idled at the dock, its back doors open. Another man stood beside it, his face obscured by a hood. Reed's voice crackled in my earpiece. Hold! The gurney reached the dock. The hooded man helped lift my father toward the van. Now, Reed said. From the shadows, 2 hospital security officers stepped forward, badges out. Reed was right behind them, his voice sharp and commanding. Stop! Step away from the patient! The hooded man bolted toward the driver's seat. Mendez shoved the gurney toward Reed and took off in the opposite direction. Harper gunned the engine, swinging the car around to cut off the van's escape. Tires screeched against wet pavement. I was out of the car before it stopped, running to the dock. My father's eyes fluttered open for a second. Confusion, fear, before closing again. Sophie's face was pale in the harsh dock light. You don't understand, she said, her voice trembling. We didn't have a choice. I stared at her. You always had a choice. You just picked the one that paid. Reed's team had the hooded man pinned against the van. Harper was already filming, her phone steady in her hand. It was over in less than 5 minutes, or so I thought. Back inside the hospital, my father was returned to his room. The sedatives would wear off by morning, the doctor assured me. He was stable now, but as I stood at his bedside listening to the steady beep of the monitor, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still hanging over us. Harper came in quietly, her expression serious. They'll face charges, trafficking, conspiracy, theft, but the buyer, he slipped. I turned to her. Slipped? Reed thinks he's part of a larger network. And if that's true, she glanced at my father. They're not going to stop just because we saved one patient. I looked at the pocket watch in my hand, its steady ticking somehow louder than before. If this was bigger than us, then saving my father was only the first step. The morning sun was breaking through Charleston's mist when my father finally opened his eyes fully. I was there, sitting in the same chair I'd occupied for hours, clutching his pocket watch like it was the only thing tethering me to the ground. "Catherine?" His voice was weak, gravelly. "I'm here, Dad." He blinked slowly, scanning the room as if piecing together where he was. "You look tired." I almost laughed. "You gave us all a scare, but you're safe now." Safe. The word felt heavy on my tongue, because even with Mendez, Sophie, and the others in custody, the buyer was still out there. A shadow in the background connected to something much larger. That afternoon, Harper and I met Reed in his office. He had a folder on his desk thick with printed photos, maps, and surveillance stills. "This," he said, tapping a grainy image, "is our guy. Name's Victor Hale. Wealthy philanthropist on paper. But behind the scenes, he funds black market organ trades in 3 states. The network is tight, hard to crack. But after last night, he knows we're onto him." I studied the picture. A tall man in an expensive suit, smiling like someone who always got his way. "What's the plan?" I asked. Reed leaned back. "Technically, my job ends here. Hospital security can't run an interstate sting, but I made some calls. There's an investigative task force willing to move if we can give them Hale on a silver platter." "And you need bait," Harper said flatly. Reed nodded. "He lost a big score last night. Your father. If we let slip that another viable donor is coming through the same hospital, he'll send someone, maybe even show up himself." My gut tightened. "You're saying we use a fake patient as a trap?" "Not just fake," Reed said. "Fully staged, actor, falsified records, lab tests that look real. It'll be airtight." Harper smirked. "Sounds risky. I like it." The next 3 days were a blur of planning. Reed coordinated with the task force, Harper handled the digital trail, and I did what I had to do. Stayed at my father's side, making sure he was truly out of danger. Every evening I walked the hospital halls, memorizing every exit, every camera angle, every blind spot. By the 4th night, it was set. The patient was a retired Navy vet named Alan Briggs, who volunteered for the role after learning what had happened to my father. He had the build, the medical history, and the courage to pull it off. We leaked the bait through the same channels Sophie had used. Quiet conversations in corners, a misplaced clipboard left in a storage room. The message was simple: healthy donor, no close family, surgery window in 48 hours. Then we waited. It happened faster than we thought. The next night, Harper's phone buzzed with a text from one of our planted contacts. "Pickup scheduled. 2 a.m. West Dock. Hale in person." We were ready. Reed and the task force positioned unmarked vans near the hospital. Harper and I took the observation point from a supply closet overlooking the dock. Through a cracked blind, I watched the empty pavement, my heart pounding in my ears. At 1:57 a.m., a black SUV rolled into view. The driver stepped out first, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. Then the back door opened. Victor Hale. He was even colder in person, his eyes scanning the dock like a predator sizing up territory. 2 men in scrubs wheeled out the gurney carrying Alan. Hale approached, pulling back the blanket to inspect his supposed merchandise. He nodded once, a satisfied little gesture that made my skin crawl. Reed's voice came low over the radio. "Wait for the handoff! Wait!" One of the scrub-clad men passed Hale a clipboard for signatures. That was the moment. "Now," Reed said. The dock lit up as task force agents poured in from every side, weapons drawn, voices shouting commands. Harper and I burst from the supply closet, cameras rolling. Hale froze, the predator's calm cracking for just a heartbeat before he tried to back toward the SUV. 2 agents closed in, cutting him off. "Victor Hale," one of them barked. "You're under arrest for human trafficking, conspiracy, and multiple counts of medical fraud." The men in scrubs were pinned to the ground. The driver was yanked from the SUV. Hale didn't resist. He just stared at me as they cuffed him, his expression unreadable. "You think you've stopped something," he said quietly, "but there's always another market." I stepped closer. "Maybe, but not here, not while I'm breathing." They led him away. The next morning, the story broke across local and national news. Organ trafficking ring exposed in Charleston hospital sting. Photos of Hale in cuffs ran alongside details of the operation. I sat by my father's bed, reading the headline aloud. His lips curved into the faintest smile. "You did it," he murmured. "We did it," I corrected. "Me, Harper, Reed, and you, for surviving long enough to see it." He chuckled weakly, then closed his eyes. A week later, I locked up my shop on Rutledge Avenue for the first time in years. The little store had been my life for so long, but after what happened, I knew I couldn't go back to business as usual. There were too many others like my father, people without someone to watch over them, vulnerable to predators like Hale. So I started something new. A small nonprofit, funded partly by the restitution from the stolen account, aimed at protecting elderly patients from exploitation. We called it the Doyle Watch. Harper signed on as lead investigator. Reed became our security advisor. And my father, he came to every meeting he could, pocket watch, ticking softly in his hand. One evening, as we were packing up after a meeting, Harper looked at me. "You know, you could have walked away after your father was safe, but you didn't." I thought of Sophie's face that night on the dock, of the way Hale had looked at me, certain his kind would never be stopped. "I guess," I said, "some battles pick you. And once they do, you either fight or you live with the cost of not fighting." Harper grinned. "Well, here's to fighting." We clinked coffee cups instead of glasses because that's what you do when you're running on caffeine and stubbornness. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't just reacting to what had been done to me. I was building something that might keep it from happening again. It's strange. I started this story thinking it was about money, about betrayal, about how family can cut deeper than anyone else. But standing there, watching my father talk to a group of volunteers about vigilance and care, I realized something else. It's about how even in the darkest moments there are people willing to stand beside you, to fight with you, to believe in the worth of one life, enough to risk their own safety for it. And maybe that's how you beat people like Hale, not by being stronger alone, but by standing together. Always. This story began with betrayal, but it ended with courage, connection, and hope. Catherine's fight wasn't only for her father's life, but for the dignity and safety of those who can't fight for themselves. It's a reminder that one determined heart can spark change that ripples far beyond one family. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe. And always remember, your love has power, and your presence changes everything.